Hello. So we've now got to the end of my top 10 favourite films series of videos, and we now get on to the my number one favourite film of all time. And as I said at the end of my last video, you might already know what this is because I've already done a bit about it. It is, of course, James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic. So I have talked a bit about this film on my blog and also on the videos that I did for my Titanic month in April, where I was looking at a whole bunch of Titanic films. I've also done a discussion video with Rachel Wagner. And so I had to think about how I was going to present this video, how to talk about it in a new way and say things that I hadn't said yet. And ultimately I decided to go with the personal approach, just how this movie makes me feel and why I love it so much. So I was 11 when I first saw this movie. It was the summer of 1998. I'd just finished primary school. My parents took me to see this film, I think after I got my exam results. And I loved it immediately. I was completely blown away by it. We know lots of documentaries about the Titanic on TV then, and so I watched pretty much all of those. When we got the VHS tape in the autumn, I watched it over and over. I've watched this film so many times I almost know it off by heart. And it got me very interested in the subject of the Titanic in general. So then as the years passed and the role of the internet in film discussion was growing, I kind of noticed that it was kind of becoming a bit uncool to like Titanic. I mean, people were saying a lot about how it was cheesy and overblown and it was really only teenage girls who liked it because of Leo mania. And so when I was reading all that, I just felt I was a little bit self-conscious of admitting it was my favourite movie. And so often I'd be saying that my favourite movie was really Apollo 13 or Terminator 2. And then in 2012, for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic sinking, the film was re-released in 3D in cinemas, and I went to go and see it, and I just loved it all over again, just seeing it on the big screen. I was smiling through a lot of it, and I said to myself, yeah, this really is my favourite film, I have to admit it. Because it's definitely not just for teenage girls. I feel it's a film for most people. For me, it's a bit like Forrest Gump in that it's never exactly the same every time I watch it. I keep thinking new thoughts about it and seeing new things. I mean, even in 2012, and even when I was rewatching it for this review, I would notice like little details in the background that I hadn't noticed before. This is a film that has just about everything. It has emotional drama, a romance, some good action, and a little bit of lightheartedness here and there as well. It's an amazing spectacle of a movie, and I think it's a great example of the magic of film, just what movies can be. And I just have a great time every time I watch it. So this is technically a historical movie, and I do really love history, and James Cameron does this great job of creating the world of 1912. But he doesn't go for just a purely historical approach, because that's already been done with regards to the Titanic in the film A Night to Remember. Instead he goes for the smaller scale character story against this historical backdrop, so combining the two. And it's not totally historically accurate, I've talked about that on my blog, but it does get a lot right, I feel. And just seeing the ship and how it worked, and things like this computer animation of the sinking that you see towards the beginning that kind of explains how it all happened. And I mean, when I saw that the ship broke in two at that point, I hadn't known that before when I saw it. It's also an interesting approach to start off in the modern day with people exploring the wreck looking for this necklace. They're creating this framing device for the main 1912 story. It creates an extra layer, and while you're watching what's going on in 1912, you're looking out for details of what's relevant to what's going on in the modern day and what might happen to the necklace. And of course there's no harm in starting off with the wreck, because the film is assuming that you already know what happens to the Titanic. And I really like how Bill Paxton's character who's exploring a wreck is able to grasp the human element of the disaster when he listens to Rose's story, and how at the end he says, for 3 years I thought of nothing except Titanic, but I never got it. And that's a little bit how I felt when I visited Belfast and the Titanic Museum last year. It is a very long movie at 3 hours, but I don't care about that because it's so well paced, and I always feel like something's happening. And as with Terminator 2, the visual effects are fantastic. So much effort went into recreating the Titanic for this movie, all the interior sets and building this scale model of the ship itself, which could then be partially sunk. It brings this ship to life from top to bottom. It's practically a character in itself. We're watching it for its short life, and then at the end we have to watch it die. The cinematography is great, like with all these sweeping shots of the ship, and this one shot during the sinking where you're looking at the Titanic from quite far away as this one rocket goes up, and you can see just how alone they are out on the ocean. And again, as with Terminator 2, the backgrounds are very detailed and shown in great clarity, and so I find myself paying more attention to the background than I do in most other films. Often you can see characters you recognise that turn up later, and you can see crowds of people just milling about doing their own thing. I absolutely love the soundtrack by James Horner. I love just about every track of that. And I will say, I love My Heart Will Go On as well. I mean, that's another thing like the film itself that is become a bit uncool to like, but I could listen to that song all day, seriously. So ultimately, this is a story of Rose, who's portrayed by Kate Winslet and Gloria Stewart in the two different time periods that we see. Winslet does this great job of showing the different sides of Rose, the face that she has to put on and her more vulnerable side. And so we follow her going on this journey where she manages to take control of her own destiny. Leonardo DiCaprio is just as good as Jack. He's very charismatic and likable. He has lots of energy. He's a very, very cool guy. And while it's ultimately Rose's story, he's not just there to serve her. He has a character and he has his own friends, his own history. He doesn't completely revolve around her. And maybe it's not a really in-depth, complex character study like other films, but that's not really the approach that Cameron was going for. If you tried to throw a combination of every single different approach you could have in there, it would just be a mess. Ultimately, it's giving us this love story that we can get behind, and I feel I definitely do that when I watch this. You want things to work out for these characters in spite of the challenges that they're facing and this disaster that you know is coming. And I feel it's not total cheese, it's got more value than that, and the way that the dialogue and the character situations is used really serves the story very well. So there are plenty of individual scenes in this film that I absolutely love. There's the scene when Jack and Rose first meet, when Rose has gone to the stern to commit suicide, and so they end up having this very engaging, natural sounding conversation with Jack choosing to approach her in this certain way by telling her about how cold the water is and how he's going to have to jump in after her. And then we get to see Jack going into first class in his tuxedo, and we get to see the beauty and grandeur of that environment. And I think that works as a bit of escapism for some people watching, because we might like to sample a little bit of that class ourselves. And I really like seeing how Jack carries himself, even though he's quite out of place. I mean, how he mimics the people around him and then still acts a bit like himself, like when he's just chewing on his bread roll in this probably inappropriate way. And then straight after that we get the third class party with all the energy and this Gaelic music. See, that's the thing about Titanic. All the people on board just covered all the different layers of society, and the film really shows the contrasts there. And then the flying scene on the bow, that's probably one of the most famous and definitely one of the most parodied scenes in the film. But I feel it is my favourite scene. There's just this beautiful simplicity to it, with the characters choosing to embrace their romance at last, and the music as well, and the visuals with the sunset and this great sweeping shot of the Titanic itself. It's a really beautiful scene. So eventually things do get more dramatic as the iceberg turns up, and I like how they build it up a little bit beforehand as you see the people in the crow's nest and on the bridge. And then once the iceberg is sighted, the scene is really drawn out to really make it as tense as possible. And then when the Titanic actually strikes the iceberg, it's loud and dramatic, but without being totally overblown. I mean, in some parts of the ship we get this almighty crash, and in other parts there's just this strange vibration. And then this quite unnerving stillness afterwards, while down below the ship is beginning to flood. And at first, for most of the passengers, there's no real awareness that anything is wrong, and this state of emergency is gradually escalating, and people slowly becoming more and more panicked as the Titanic sinks lower and lower into the water. There's more action and tension and danger for Jack and Rose at this point, and they get put under pressure, and we see what they do and the decisions that Rose has to make. And all the while the corridors are flooding more and more, and the ship is groaning, and there's plenty of other people down in the lower corridors who just have no idea what to do. And again, that's the benefit of paying so much attention to the background, seeing all these people, even the ones that we don't know. I mean, you care about the characters we recognise in particular, but you also care about everybody on board in general. Like there's this quick shot of this third class family who doesn't speak English, looking through this book to try and just see what a sign says and where they are. And you think, yeah, they're not making it out of this. And then there's another great scene as Rose does get into a lifeboat, and for a few moments she's being lowered and holding Jack's gaze, and everything else goes silent and apart from the music. And then ultimately we get more passion as she decides to get back on the ship and join him. The last few stages of the sinking are handled really well, just this total chaos, and everywhere is flooding at this point, all these sets being drowned. We see most of the side characters die, we see a whole bunch of other people just struggling desperately for life, and this just adds so much more impact than if it was far off and in nothing but CGI. Definitely the scene where the Titanic has sunk and we get this lifeboat just going through this sea that's been carpeted with frozen bodies just really makes it hit home. We come to this emotional climax of Jack sadly dying, but then the more hopeful side of Rose choosing to live and saying goodbye to her old life. And it's great in the last few moments of the film to see all these photographs that old Rose has to show the excellent life that she had. And then that final sequence of when we dive down to the wreck and the ship basically comes back to life, and we see all the people that we recognise there. And people debate whether or not it's a dream or whether Rose has actually died and is entering the afterlife. And one thing I noticed for the first time when I was watching this in the cinema in 2012 is that when Jack is standing on the staircase, the clock behind him reads 2:20, which is the time that the Titanic sank. And I feel that's a clue that it is the afterlife and Rose is passing on. So yeah, that's what I think. So there we are. That is Titanic, my number one favourite film of all time. And that brings to an end my top 10 favourite films series. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be doing next on this video channel, but please stay tuned, and thank you very much for watching again, and I hope you enjoyed it.